The question now is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Braddon.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And that previous contribution was quite extraordinary, celebrating a measure that you're now reinstating of something that you took away in the first place. I'm quite flabbergasted, and coming from a government that actually has no national energy policy, it's just quite, I don't know, I'm a little bit lost for words. But I'll go to my speech, so I have a lot to say on this bill. And this is a bill that this government, this side of the House will support, because this government has not suddenly had a policy masterstroke. It's because the Labor cares about pensioners. And this is a government that's planning to take away the energy supplement of $365 a year and offering a one-off payment of $75 for a single and $62.5 for each in a couple. Now, I have to say, in Tasmania, where we have some of the clean, green, renewable energy created with our own base load in hydro dams and supplemented by wind power, $75 a week for, say, a single mum with a couple of kids, or $75 a one-off payment, will not cover the electricity that that mum has used for a week. Would not make much difference at all, and quite astounding that this bill does not even provide any support for people on Newstart, some of the most vulnerable people in our community who don't live at home where they can be supplemented by their parents, who are out there trying every day, hopefully to look for a job, doing what they can to make ends meet, and there's no support for them. So why is this assistance so important for Tasmanian pensioners? Well, the Australian Energy Regulator report has found that low-income Tasmanians pay the highest proportion of their income for electricity of any state in the national electricity market. A low-income family in Tasmania without any concession would typically pay about $2,000 a year, or 8.5% of their disposable income, to Aurora Energy for 6,500 kilowatt-hours of electricity. Middle-income households pay about 4.3% of their annual income, and high-income households pay just 1.75%. So in order to reduce one's bill, you have to reduce your consumption. That is quite clear. I think people get that, as Tasmania's average unit cost of electricity is sensitive to consumption levels. So that is clearly a way in Tasmania that you reduce your electricity bill by reducing your consumption. So you can imagine that pensioners will reduce their consumption in order to reduce their bills, because clearly the government's taking away, and this is what they're planning to do, take away their supplement. But at what point does this mean pensioners are going to live through winter with no heating at all? And sadly, this is something that I hear all the time, even with the energy supplement in place. This is what I'm hearing all the time. Sonia from Olveston in my electorate, who's in her 70s, recently wrote to me, and she said, "I am an aged pensioner and currently renting the premises in which I am residing. The cost of power has risen significantly," and she was actually quoting about over 25 years. That's how much she takes notice of her electricity bills. "The cost of heating is a major proportion of that cost. I am sure that many pensioners, even those that own their own homes, are going without adequate heating rather than facing a bill for power that takes up a fortnight's income, leaving them with little to cover essentials such as groceries or medication. I am one of them. There are thousands of Sonias in my electorate. My electorate has a higher proportion of the population on the aged and disability support pension compared to the state average. A higher proportion, obviously, than the national average. And I've heard many pensioners that live without heating over winter, that sit there pretty much freezing. And you can imagine, I don't know, it's not, in some cases it's just as cold as a Canberra winter in Tasmania, but you can just imagine what that would be like in a room, putting on as many layers as you can, not even being able to afford to turn on a little heater, not even a heat pump, which is probably the most efficient way of heating a home. You wouldn't even be able to afford to turn that on. And this is with the energy supplement that the government is now planning to take away and replace with a little one-off payment that wouldn't pay the energy bill for a week. And to those pensioners on a pensioner concession card, which they've now, for some, reinstating, which they took away for some as well, the state government provides a $6 per year concession and an annual electricity concession of 132.557 cents per day for those on a pensioner concession card and a healthcare card. So with all that support for Tasmanian pensioners, they still are finding it hard to be able to afford to turn on their heaters in a Tasmanian winter. And this government is planning to whack them again by taking away the energy supplement and give them a little sweetener. Well, if that's a diversion, if ever I heard one, then they should be sitting there with their heads in shame. With less support to pay for their bills, I know that this will only get worse. And we can see from disconnections for non-payment. And this is a marker of those in our community that are finding it hard to pay their bills, their electricity bills. In the years 2015 and 16, there was a 12% increase in disconnections for non-payment, from 1,046 to 1,172. And sadly, you have to say that this can only get worse. The average electricity debt was $739. 1 in 5 customers of Aurora, the only energy retailer in the state, entered a partnership program and had a debt of more than $2,500. That is extraordinary. And what does this government do? Take away a supplement. And now with the closure of Hazelwood, the average additional amount Tasmanians will now pay for electricity in the year 2018 and 19 will be an extra $204, the highest of any state. And that is because Tasmania's consumption level is twice that of Victoria and the highest in the country. And the government clearly doesn't care about that. A government has clearly misled the Australian people when it said in 2013 no cuts to pensions. But every budget since being elected, the government has wanted to cut pensions and to hurt pensioners. Let's not forget the 2014 budget. How could you forget that? I think every pensioner in the country remembers that one quite clearly. And the former member for North Sydney, his legendary Age of Entitlement is Over budget set the scene for the government's attacks on pensioners. And they have attempted, some they've succeeded at and some they have failed at in their attacks. They tried to cut pension indexation, planned to freeze assets and income tests for 3 years from this year, which they've achieved, planned to increase the deeming thresholds for the income test to $30,000 for single pensioners and $50,000 for pensioner couples combined, abolish the seniors supplement from the 1st of July 2014, make the seniors healthcare card harder to qualify for, cut $1.3 billion in support to states and territory-based seniors concessions, which goes then to these energy concessions that some of the states put in place, like in Tasmania, abolish the dependent spouse rebate for people aged 60 or older, abolish the mature age worker tax offset, abolish the pensioner education supplement. What a litany of attacks the 2000 budget was to pensioners. Let's not also forget that the then Treasurer's comments that not one pensioner would lose their pensioner concession card, and now they're restoring it. They got rid of it for some pensioners, now they're bringing it back, and now they're celebrating it. And it's quite funny because I heard a comment from the member of Gilmore who said, I think it was yesterday, that she celebrated the return of the pensioner concession card. Woohoo! Great. Well, where was she when it was removed? Where were those members on the other side when that was removed from these pensioners? They stood there. They stood there in 2015 when they did a dirty deal with the Greens Party to cut the pension for around 330 people in our country by changing the pension assets test. And people ask me about that all the time in my electorate. Why did you change that? And I'm very proud to say it wasn't us. It wasn't Labor. It was the government. It was the Liberal coalition government doing a deal with the Greens. Pensioners have long memories, and this is one change they will never forget. They still want to increase the pension age to 70. Australia will have the oldest pension age in the world, and due to the nature of work for the people in my electorate, many people will be physically unable to work to that age. I am reminded by the words of pensioners Ray and Trudy from Turners Beach in my electorate that I've previously spoken about in this place, and it's worth reminding the House of these comments. And I quote, "It comes as no surprise to see what the present government is trying to do to people of our age. After telling us for years to save and sacrifice towards retirement, they try and change the game and change the rules. The one thing that gets under our skin is the changing of the retirement age. We think it's disgusting that people who have to work hard all of their lives may now be expected to work until they're 70 years of age. We may have voted them in last time, but it was a first and a last time. They have made blunder after blunder, and if what people at that time know, if that's what they're going on, it will be the last time we see this coalition government in. And despite all the dishonesty, the attacks and the dirty deals, the government is still going ahead with the cuts to the clean energy supplement. And Braddon pensioners are paying the most, as I've clearly stated, with the amount that they pay out of their income towards electricity. This cut will see them lose $14.10 for a single pensioner a week, or $365 a year. Couples will be worse off by $21.20 a fortnight. Sorry, that previous figure was for a fortnight, or $365 a year. The Prime Minister wants to paint himself as the pensioner's friend, almost like Robin Hood, taking from the rich and giving to the poor, but he's more like the Sheriff of Nottingham, taking from the poor and giving to the rich. This legislation is not before the House because the Prime Minister wants to help pensioners. It is here as a result of a deal the Prime Minister did so he could get part of his company tax plans through the Senate. If the Prime Minister could really be trusted as the pensioners' friend, we would have heard from him and other members on the other side in 2014, 2015, 2016 and the first part of 2017, to be there, to be the friend of pensioners, but not a word, except, of course, to vote in this place to cut pensioners. Let's look no further at their record. Labor will support this bill, but I can tell you we will continue to fight for pensioners in Australia, in my electorate, and oppose the abolition of the clean energy supplement, which I give great pleasure to stand here in this place, and I will go through all of this again for every member on the other side and remind them why in Tasmania this is a bad, bad thing. This will mean pensioners in my electorate and my home state will suffer over the cold winters. They'll have their power disconnected and at higher levels than what we've seen. And we sit there on the other side, or those sit there on the other side and obviously taking no notice of what I'm saying, which is just terrible. And you have to also ask yourself, where is the Liberal Tasmanian Senate members? What are they saying on this? Nothing. Where are they? Nothing. Nothing. If they're there for the people of Tasmania who have such a disproportionately high number of people on government payments, what are they saying? Nothing. We just have to look at the budget. It was absolutely deplorable for the state of Tasmania. It was the forgotten state. I've just been in the Federation Chamber and I'll say it here, the same comments. I need to give every member of the coalition a map of Tassie. It hasn't seceded to Antarctica yet. But let's look at what they're doing, those Liberal senators. Absolutely nothing. Pensioners should not be forced to freeze over winter months just because this Prime Minister has warped priorities.